My name is Becky Blalock, and I'm the managing partner at Advisory Capital, which is a strategic consulting firm focused on information technology, medicine, and energy. I had the good fortune to spend 33 years in corporate America. I began my career at Georgia Power Company as an accounting associate and climbed up the corporate ladder through many different roles, and ultimately spent the last 9 years of my career in corporate America as the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer of Southern Company, where I directed all of the information technology activities across the 9 subsidiaries of the company. I grew up in many different places as a child. I went to 4 high schools, 3 junior highs, and 8 elementary schools. And my dad was in the Air Force, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. And growing up, that was a lot of fun until you got into middle school. And then it becomes a little difficult to walk in and be the new person in the school. And it wasn't until I entered the corporate world that I realized what a gift that had been. Coming out of college, I was recruited to go to work for Georgia Power Company, and the first thing they did is they moved me to a small town. They moved me to Americus, Georgia. And many of my friends who were from Atlanta at the time said, "Oh my goodness, you're going to move to a small town where you don't know anybody." And I realized then that I wasn't afraid to do that because I'd been doing it my entire life. And also, I think in my career, a lot of times I jumped into new organizations where I wasn't a subject matter expert, and I was not afraid to do that because of these experiences I had had as a child growing up, going into a situation where I didn't know anybody and having to find my way and knowing that ultimately I would. So in the long term, I think that that actually ended up being a very key part of my success. When I went to college, it was to be a social worker. I had never dreamed of having a career in business, never thought about a career in business because I think it's very hard to be something you've never seen. And this was the 70s when I was in high school, and at that point in time, I can't recall ever seeing a female role model in business. In fact, the only 2 women I can even remotely think about being in business was Mary Tyler Moore on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and she worked in the newsroom, but she was not the supervisor or the manager, and the other person was Miss Kitty, who worked on a show called Gunsmoke, and she was the owner of the saloon. And so those were kind of the 2 role models I had. But I had the good fortune of taking an internship with a marketing professor. I had been working for $1.65 an hour in retail because I was working and putting myself through undergraduate school when one of the marketing professors posted a job for $5 an hour doing marketing research. And so I jumped at the opportunity to do that. That was like, you know, felt like I'd be rich, $5 an hour. And his name was Walter Woods, and Walter's pretty famous because he patented the frozen orange juice concentrate. It was his idea. And he's now deceased, but I had a lot of fun working with him, conducting the research, and then we analyzed the data together, and he was under contract with a company called Yankelovich, Skelly & White out of New York. And he said to me, you know, you're really good with math, you're really good at taking large volumes of data and seeing trends. He says, why aren't you doing something in business? And I said, well, I don't know anybody in business. I, don't have anybody to coach me in that arena. He said, well, why don't you sign up for a couple of my classes, which I did. And of course, I will have to admit I was the teacher's pet. But I loved it, I really did, and found that I really had an affinity for math and statistics and quantitative analysis, and got an undergraduate degree in marketing. And when I graduated in 1978, the college had a very good recruitment program. And I knew that I wanted to stay in the South. I had lived all over the country, and so when job opportunities came along, I would go and interview, but tried to stay limited to something in the South. And Georgia Power recruited me to go into their accounting management training program. So fresh out of college, I started right back into school and was in a 3-month training program, and at the end of that, they sent me to Americus, Georgia, where I was the supervisor of the meter readers and the customer service reps. And I did that for about 18 months, and the next move up for me would have been to district accounting supervisor. And it was very difficult to get those jobs, particularly as a woman, because in those days, there were no women who held those jobs in the company. Nobody had ever done it, and frankly, people just didn't think it could be done. So ultimately, I decided I would come back to Atlanta and get my master's degree. I got my MBA in finance and was very fortunate in that I had a position working in the finance department. It was an exciting time to be in the company because we had a very aggressive construction program. We were building Plant Vogel in Waynesboro, Georgia, building Plant Shera down in Macon, and had to do billions of dollars worth of financing. So in order to do that, you have to be very active with Wall Street and with the rating agencies, and we worked very closely with the senior executives in the company. It was incredible in terms of my opportunity to learn about that side of our business, plus the exposure that gave me to executives. And I realized that while I loved finance, that wasn't what I wanted to do long term in my career. My undergraduate degree was in marketing, and I really wanted an opportunity to be in marketing. And economic development had always fascinated me too. So I went over and I had a conversation with the guy who ran that department, and his feedback to me was, women can't do this kind of work. He said, you know, you have to wine and dine men at night. And he said, I just don't think it would work. The people you have to interact with are other men. There are no women, even external to our company, that do this kind of work. So I was a little frustrated, but 2 years later he retired and somebody else replaced him. And some people put in a good word for me. They posted a job. It actually was a job that was 2 levels lower than where I was at the time. And I took a voluntary 2-level demotion to go into that position. And all the people I worked with in finance thought I was crazy. They said, why in the world would you do this? But I just knew intuitively that I was a marketing person at heart and that I had to do something to break out of being viewed as a technical finance person. And as it turns out, that really was the best possible move for me career-wise. I didn't see it. 2 weeks into that, I went home and told my husband, I said, I think I've made a big mistake. I said, you know, these people don't talk in terms of ROI or internal rate of return. They're talking about square footage and tax incentives, and I don't know anything about all that. But I'm very fortunate in that my husband coached me and said, you just need to give yourself some time to settle in and learn it. And sure enough, about a month in, I began to learn all the new acronyms. I began to fit in. I did meet some other people outside the company who became good friends with, who said, we'll help you find some deals. And 2 years later, I actually was the top producing person in the department. One of the things I learned in economic development is I had a very strong background in finance, and nobody else in the department did. They either came from engineering or they came from a sales background. And to put together these deals and make it real attractive for companies to choose Georgia as a location, it was all about the economics. And nobody knew better how to do that in the department than I did, to put down the internal rate of return of what we could put on the table as a state versus another state they might be looking at, and go back and negotiate for the incentives. And that became really the key reason why I was so successful in the department. People would call me up and say, I want to bring you into a project because I know you can sit down and you can help us put together the incentive package and talk to the company about why it makes economic sense to be in Georgia versus being in another state. And so that was really very key to my success, was that background I had in finance and the fact that I brought a little bit of diversity to the table. And also, as they began to create some chamber president roles and hired some project managers at the state that were women, I bonded together with them, and they were very determined, along with some very forward-thinking men, to help me be successful in that role. When they hired me in economic development, I was actually brought on board to create a commercial development program. Historically, we had only focused on recruiting heavy manufacturing. And if you looked at even all our marketing materials, it was about, you know, what a forklift operator or a plant operator would charge per hour. And all of the sites were in industrial parks. And what they had brought me on board to do was to go after corporate headquarter locations and data centers and more what was considered white-collar working. We'd not done a lot of that in the past, but timing was perfect because these were very clean jobs. They required a really heavily educated workforce. And we had a number of locations in Georgia that they could go into, but we had to develop all the marketing materials, had to go around and talk to people all across the state. People in Atlanta were pretty open, but in some of the second-tier cities, they'd never really done a lot of recruitment in this space. And it took a success for people to catch on to the fact that this was really where we needed a lot of focus on jobs. My first success was that I got a lead on a data center opportunity, and they wanted to come to Atlanta. And when I first started working with the decision makers, it was between Atlanta and Boston and Nevada. And they had absolutely no intention of looking anywhere else in Atlanta. But what I told them was that, you know, if you'll go down and take a look at Macon in Columbus, Georgia, I'll get the company's helicopter and we'll fly down there in the helicopter. And they'd never been in a helicopter before, so who knew? So they were willing to go down and take a look. I called the two communities. In these communities, we had been working with them on marketing and what kind of information they needed to have. And the leaders in those communities did a fabulous job. And I never will forget, we went to Atlanta, and then we went to Macon and spent the night. And they were really not talking to me, these four gentlemen working on the project, but they came down and knocked on my room after we had had dinner with the folks in Macon, because Macon said, if you come here, we will give you the land. You know, we will, give you tax incentives. Atlanta wasn't going to offer them any of that. So they knocked on my room and said, would you come down and would you have a drink with us? They said, we want to talk to you. Is this for real? Or would they really give us the land? Would they really give us these tax breaks to come here? I said, absolutely they will. I said, they know that they need to do that if they're going to compete with Atlanta. And from that point on, I was just in like Flint with them. And they really talked with me and communicated with me. And they kicked out the other locations after that. And it became all about Macon and Columbus, who were willing to give them the incentives and who had a community that rolled out the red carpet for them. Unfortunately, it was very competitive. I felt like a ping pong ball between those two cities. But Macon won out, and it really shone a light on the fact that here's this whole market of new opportunity for us, of these, corporate headquarters or regional headquarters and data centers and call centers that we can be recruiting that we haven't been focused on. And these are, jobs that don't pollute, and they are relatively high-paying positions. And so from there, the rest is history. That's how I was successful as a project manager, was blazing that trail. And really loved that work, but I got a tap on the shoulder from some of the executives I worked with and said, we'd really like for you to go be a lobbyist for our company. We want you to be a lobbyist at the Public Service Commission, not at the Capitol, which tends to be a more political hot seat and tends to be a little more glamorous. This was at the Public Service Commission, where I was handling a lot of the really technical data. But again, great opportunity to learn yet another piece of our business, because as a regulated entity, everything that goes on in that arena is life or death for us as a company. So I was a part of our rate case team. I handled the fuel cases, and we were just beginning to see the early stages of environmental regulation at the commission as well. So 2 years into that job, I got another tap on the shoulder, and they said, we'd like for you to go back over and run the entire economic development group. This was the group who earlier had said, women can't do this kind of work. So it was a great opportunity to go back. It was a challenge, though, because here were these really smart, talented men who had all trained me, and I'm coming back over to be their boss. And not that they were unhappy, but I think there were some people who felt that they should have gotten that job instead of me. So I think one of the most important things I did when I got into that job is I took each person to lunch individually and talked to them about the fact that I appreciated how much they had done for me to help me be successful. And I knew that I would never have had that success had it not been for them, and that I wasn't going to be successful if we couldn't continue to work together as a team. That my whole view was that I was not the boss, I was just the person leading the team, and that we wouldn't be successful if we weren't all pulling together. And believe it or not, just those intimate one-on-one conversations totally turned around my relationship with all of them, where they committed in those meetings to support me. And we had a tremendous amount of success. One of the things we did is help the company create a program to really leverage our sponsorship in the 1996 Olympics. The project was called Operation Legacy, and it was so successful that it actually became a model for how host cities used the Olympic Games in the future. I had many conversations afterwards with London when they were recruiting the Olympics, with people from China and people from Salt Lake City about how we ran this program. And our group won some awards. Some national real estate groups picked us as one of the top economic development groups in the country, and we exceeded our goals by 300%. So it really was a fun, successful time, and I think I would have been happy staying in that job for the rest of my career. But I had been chosen to go through the program for management development at Harvard. Every year our company picked one person, and I had that honor. And while I was at graduation at Harvard, our CEO called me and offered me the job as his assistant too. And he was a great man, and that's considered a prized job inside of the company. But I really wasn't that excited about it, but I thought, how do I tell a CEO no? So I said, well, I guess I have to walk away from this dream job and take this position, which again was a very smart move. One of my philosophies has always been, don't say no. Don't say no unless you're 100% certain that it's something you just don't want to do. If you can learn and if you can grow, you should always accept that opportunity. I also think that what's important is who you're going to be working for. I always tell people, choose your boss as carefully as you choose your next job. Is this somebody who's going to support you and that you're going to learn from and grow from, and that will help you reach that next level in your career? And he was certainly that kind of person. So I became his assistant too. Typically you're in those jobs for about 2 years. 5 months into that job, he walked in one day and said, we're creating new positions called Chief Information Officers. And we're going to have one at Southern Company, and then each one of the operating companies will have one. And we want you to be the one from Georgia Power. And I said, well, what does the Chief Information Officer do? I thought it was maybe something to do with communications. And he said, oh no, this is running all the information technology across the organization. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I don't hardly even know how to turn on my computer. But he said, and this ended up being very true, he said, I am very frustrated. He said, we cannot get any of the information we need out of the systems we have to run this company. He said, you've seen that as you've been here working with me as my assistant too. He said, I don't know the people that work in that department. He said, I don't trust them. I want you to take this job and go down there and figure out what we need to do to get the information I need to run this company. So I said, well, you know, nothing like going into the frying pan. So I stepped into this job where I didn't know the people, I didn't know the culture. It was a job that was actually housed at Southern Company, and I reported up to the enterprise CIO. And every day was really like putting out a fire. We had systems that went down on a pretty regular basis. People who had been calling me up wanting to have lunch to me when I was the assistant to the CEO were calling me up and yelling at me about something that wasn't happening right with their department. I'm like, are you the same person that I talked to 2 weeks ago? Anyway, it was very interesting, but here is something that happened that was really very telling to me. I think that job was so important in preparing me to move on up the corporate ladder out of middle management and into senior leadership. There was a young woman I had worked with in accounting. She'd been on my team, she followed me to marketing. She was on my team in marketing. And then she accepted a job in information technology when I went to work there. 6 months into that job, she walked up to me and she said, you know, you're a much better leader here than you were when we worked together in accounting. And I said, how can you say that? I feel like on any given day, I don't know what I'm doing here. And she said, well, that's the beauty of it. She said, because when we were in accounting, you were the subject matter expert. And she said, you micromanaged everything we did. And she said, a lot of times you wouldn't even let us do the work, you'd do our work for us. And she said, here, you can't do that. She said, because it changes too much, it's too broad, it's too technical. She said, so you've had to surround yourself with a big bunch of people. And she said, you listen to people. And she said, and you take their input in consideration when making decisions. And she said, that's what leadership is about. She said, you're a much better leader. And that was a real wake-up call to me, that the higher up the corporate ladder you go, the less the job really is about you. The more it is about who you surround yourself with, who you listen to, who you trust, and how you manage and lead and support them. And that was like one of the real aha moments in my career. As I had mentioned earlier, I thought that what was important is growing the Southern Company brand as an innovative company. So we created an intellectual property program at Southern Company. Prior to that, we had no patents in the IT department. There were a few patents at Southern Company, not many, I think maybe about 7, but none coming out of IT. And I'm very proud to say that with very few resources, and it takes a long time to get a program like that up and off the ground, by the time I retired from the department, we had 63 items that had cleared the patent program and were moving forward to be patented. We had 7 patents in hand, and we had commercialized the program. We're bringing in $15 million in annual revenue, with us being on track for that to just be a normal part of doing business in the future. And we were able to take that and publicize it, because really none of the other utilities across the country had a program like ours. So it set us apart from what anybody else in our industry was doing. We had also been picked by CIO Magazine as one of the most innovative companies for some of the tools that we had rolled out in IT. Many of the members on my team had won lots of recognition. I was picked as a premier IT leader by Computer World Magazine, and then 3 other people on my team were recognized by them. We were in lots of publications. You know, there were no mentions of Southern Company, you know, to speak of prior to my role in IT, but it was a regular basis. Somebody was calling and wanting to talk to us and highlight some new technology that we had rolled out. And every year now, Southern Company is recognized as one of the best places to work in IT and one of the most innovative in the country. And we are no longer rated very low on that innovation scale when it comes to Fortune magazine. So I'd like to say that I helped play some small role in making that happen at Southern Company. So then after being in IT for about a little over a year, I got a call offering me the opportunity to go interview for the Director of Corporate Communications at Georgia Power. And the reason that I jumped at the chance to do that job is because the company was an Olympic sponsor, and the Olympics was here. And it was a chance to manage all of our PR and advertising opportunities for the Olympics, to manage the whole media relations and advertising function, and to bring to bear some of the technical expertise I'd had, because the internet was just beginning to become a mode of communication, and web pages were just becoming prevalent. And so I could drive all that change inside the company. And I also got a lot of really deep training on how to respond in a crisis and be a much better communicator. And we did have some tragedies that happened while I was there. We had a power plant that blew up, and we had some employees that were killed, which was very tragic. And then we had a terrible ice storm that occurred right when Atlanta was hosting the Super Bowl. So I had to put together a press conference to ensure everybody that we were going to try to keep the electricity on when this very important event was happening in Atlanta. And those are just skills that you take with you regardless of where you go in any company. Communication skills will stay with you. I always tell people that if you're not a good communicator, or if you're not a good public speaker, you can learn to do that. Leadership and communication are learned, and so is confidence. You just have to be willing to put yourself out there and practice and grow it through experience. So I had the opportunity to go back to economic development, and this time I went back as the vice president. And I was not the first woman to be named a vice president in our company. I was the second person to be named a vice president, but I always tell people I was the first one who was also a mother. My daughter was 4 at the time. And so I've spent a lot of time reflecting. She's now 24 years old, and talking to other women about the fact that you can do this. You can have a family, and you can be a successful executive as well. You know, the great thing about balance is my daughter is now grown, so and is 24. When she was in school, I felt so guilty because I would be pulling out of the driveway to take her to school, and I was the only working mother in our neighborhood. And some of those mothers were staying out there with their children, and they would give me dirty looks as I was going off to work. Or maybe I just perceived that. I was very self-conscious about it. And one mother actually said to me one day, she said, "You know, the beauty of having your own child is you make all the decisions about how they're raised, and then you suffer the consequences when they end up in the juvenile delinquency system because you haven't done, you know, all the things you needed to help them be successful." And, you know, you fast forward 24 years now, and my daughter is going to be a drug dealer. She's in pharmacy school at the University of Georgia. So I did a few things right. And we have conversations now. I ask her, I say, you know, do you remember me not being there as you were growing up? Because I used to feel awfully guilty about not being at stuff. And she said, no. She said, I really don't remember you not ever being at anything. And she said, I remember you used to ask me, we used to sit down, and I used to ask her to help me understand what was really important, what were the things I needed to be at. And she remembers those conversations. And the things that were important to her changed. When she was little, she could have cared less if I was driving her to school. She had a really cool babysitter that sometimes would drive her to school, and that's who she wanted to be seen with, and not me. And but what was really important when she was little was for me to be the mother that came and read the story in the classroom. So if that happened, you can bet at work I told them I didn't care what else was going on. I made arrangements so I could be there, and I had cupcakes and balloons, and we made a really big deal. And those are the things that she remembers. She doesn't remember a lot of the other stuff. And I think that those personal times that you have with them, it's quality time, not quantity of time that you spend with your child that's important. And I think our daughters are all going to be working in the future. If you look at the women who've come into the workforce since 1970, we've added 25% to the gross domestic product of the U.S. We can't afford to not have women in the workforce anymore. And so women who are working and balancing these careers are great role models for their daughters, and how they can make it all work for themselves when they grow up. Because today, 60% of working women are the primary breadwinners for their families. And that's only going to change as we continue to move forward in the future. And as the vice president of that organization, again, we had a lot of successes, exceeded all of our goals. And then 2 years into that job, I had the opportunity to go back and run all of IT for Southern Company, which was a huge job. And I was in that role for 9 years. It was not a great situation to inherit. When I went into the department, morale was really terrible. We scored the lowest among the organizations on the Employee Progress Survey. We did not get good ratings internally from the people that we supported. And we didn't hold any patents, and we didn't have any external recognition. But over the 9-year period that I was there, the team that I put in place, and I'd like to say we made a lot of progress with the company. And one of the great insights I got is the CEO of Southern Company at the time, a guy by the name of Alan Franklin, and I had a conversation when I got the job. He said to me something very wise, and I share this with a lot of other people now. He said, you know, when you get to a job at this level, people call you all the time and ask you to do all kinds of things that don't add any value to the company. He said, you're going to have to be very disciplined about where you spend your time. Normally when somebody goes into a job like this at this level, he said, I write 3 things down on a sheet of paper, and I tell the executive, this is where you need to spend your time. And if you go outside of this, then you've wasted a lot of the company's money. He said, I don't know what to tell you these 3 things are. He said, I really don't know much about information technology. So I want you to go off and think about what are those 3 things that you think that you need to be spending your time on. What are the 3 things, what are the 3 legacies you want to leave for this company? So I left and I spent time talking to all my direct reports. I did some focus group meetings with, you know, a lot of employees on the front line. I talked to the vendors. I talked to the companies that we did a lot of business with and asked them, I said, how do we stack up against other companies? What do you think it is that we need to be focused on? I talked to our internal customers, and I asked our internal customers, I said, tell me one or two things we do well, tell me one or two things we need to improve on. And then I talked to a couple of large industrial customers. I said, tell me your impression about how technology savvy you think we are. And as a customer, are there things that you'd like to see our company do that could serve you better? And it's amazing, when you step back and you take the time to do that, people will pretty much give you a good long list of exactly what it is you need to be focused on. So I summed all that up and I went back to the CEO and I said, I think there's three things that we need to do. I said, first and foremost, when you look at our company's brand, and every year we were competing for America's Most Admired Company. They had 7 criteria they rated companies on. We scored pretty high on everything except innovation. And I said, I think there is a lot that we can do to change the company's brand as one that's really innovative and creative. We're doing things that are far beyond what anybody else in the industry is doing in the way we apply technology, but we never tell anybody about it. We never apply for any patents or any awards. I said, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to do that. The second thing is, I said, these are some of the smartest, most talented people in the company, but you know what? They never go anywhere unless they go out. And I said, we have got to find a way to take some of this talent and have these people go work in the core business. In some of my focus group meetings, when I talk to people, I said, you know, have you ever been out to a district office or a power plant? And they said no. And I said, how can you be developing technologies for this company if you've never had an opportunity to go work in the core business and really understand how people would use this? And so I said, I really want us to be, I want to look back on my department and say we have grown a lot of talent that has gone on to do many great things in this company. And then the third thing that I think we need to be extremely focused on is rolling out technologies. And I said, I can't tell you what those are. I don't know enough about the department. I don't know enough about what's coming in the next 5 to 10 years. But this company, this organization needs to play a key role in figuring out what we're going to do that's going to drive success, take cost out, help us open up new markets, help us better serve customers. And I said, in 5 years, I'll be able to at least look back and say we did some significant things in that area. And believe it or not, the entire 9 years I was in that job, I stayed focused on those three things: building the brand, focused on the internal employees and their development, and then focused on what are those new technologies we need to be rolling out. Everything else was secondary to that. If I disciplined myself to stay focused on that, then I found that I was driving a lot of value to the company. And so when I now speak to a lot of younger people who are coming up or younger executives, I always tell them you can't be everything. So you've got to think about what's most important and make sure you stay focused on that. And I think that's very important to helping you be successful in any job that you go into. And then after a 33-year career, I said, you know, there are still a lot of things I want to do in life. I'm young enough. I can retire. My pension has vested. And I'm going to go do it. So I retired. I'd always had a dream of writing a book. And that really came about because as a senior executive, you get asked a lot to go speak to other people, and particularly women. And I found that when I would go speak, I would be really struggling with, oh my goodness, what am I going to share? What am I going to say to people? But yet, after I would talk, and it's not that I'm that great a speaker, people would be lined up, young women, because they're all looking for a role model. They're looking for somebody who's been successful to tell them what they should or shouldn't do. And I also liken leadership to, once you reach that level, you forget about all the little lessons that you've learned. I sometimes tell people, when you go teach your child how to drive a car, you forget how much is involved in driving that car until you're sitting on the other side and you're trying to put your foot on the pedal as they're trying to drive. And I think careers are the same way. Once you've crossed the line or you've learned something, you forget how hard it is and that people aren't born knowing these things. So I really wanted to leave behind some of my lessons learned for the next generation of people coming along. And there were a lot of books out in the marketplace, but most of the books out there were either written by men or they were written by academics or they were written by consultants, not by people who had actually lived this and done it and could talk about their own experiences. And I was extremely fortunate because after writing a manuscript, somebody hooked me up with an agent who hooked me up with a publisher. And Wiley Publishing, who's one of the big publishing houses in the country, decided to publish my book. And Wiley asked me, they said, you know, we want you to go out and interview a lot of other women and have their stories in here too. So that ended up making the book, I think, even more powerful. And the book's been out for 1.5 years now and has been highly successful. Now, concurrent with my book coming out, I started my own consulting business because I kept having people approach me about coming to work for them in IT. And I really didn't want to work for anybody else. I wanted to have my own company and continue promoting my book, because once you get a book out, people want you to come and speak a lot and want you to do workshops. And I was approached by an Indian company, a company called Tech Mahindra, one of the largest companies in India. And they've been my client now for 2.5 years. So I consult with them on the side, and I continue to be out across the country talking about my book. And the book is really has 3 key messages. The first message in the book is you have to dare to begin within. And the primary thesis of the book is all about building confidence. Because if you have the confidence to go do something, and if you're willing to just be courageous and put yourself out there, there really isn't much you can't do. But you just got to have the confidence to get out there and make it happen. And the first message is dare to begin within. Know what it is that you want. As a senior executive, I coached and mentored a lot of young people, and the first question I would ask them is, well, what is it that you want? And the #1 answer I would always get back is, I don't know. And I wanted to say, well, you know what? My crystal ball's not working too good today. There's not very much I can do to help somebody who doesn't know what they want. But yet, when I think back to the early stages of my career, I think I stumbled along too, because I didn't really know what the career options were that were out there. Nobody told me you should be more focused, more thoughtful about what it is that you're going to do. People did tell me I should write things down. And I used to think, well, why should I write it down? I've got it all up here. But truth of the matter is, if you're not willing to invest the time in writing it down, then you're not going to invest the time it takes to make it happen. Because senior jobs in corporate America, it's tough. It's very grueling, and it's very competitive. But if you are very focused on what it is that you want, and you can communicate it very succinctly to other people, they will help you make it happen. But they can't help you if they don't know what you want. So I spend a lot of time in the first part of my book telling people, know what it is that you want. Know what your values are. Sometimes you don't know the exact job you want, but you know what's important to you in terms of your values, and they become a guidepost for helping you make decisions about the direction that you go in. The second thing is be bold and aggressive in going after what you want. Now that's one place where I feel like I was always pretty good at doing that, and that came from all that moving around as a child and going into situations where you didn't know people. I learned early on not to be afraid to ask. I mean, all people can do is say no, but so many people don't ask, and particularly not women. In fact, all the research says that last year, coming out of college, 57% of men negotiated their salaries and only 7% of women did. And what's significant about that is that of those who negotiated, they got 8% more. So when I talk, I tell young people, you should always ask. Now be logical about how you ask and have a reason for asking for more money, but you should negotiate. Don't take the first offer that somebody puts on the table. And even people who've been in their jobs for a while don't always ask for a raise, even when they go in for their annual performance review. About 64% of men do, and about 46% of women do. But what's significant about that is 4 out of 5 times when people ask for a raise, they get it. So I tell people, do your homework before you go in. Help the company understand why you should end up being paid more money. And think about the fact, too, that, hey, it's not all about cash. You know, there are a lot of ways to be compensated beyond cash. You can ask for vacation. You can ask for them to pay for your MBA. You can ask to telecommute. You can ask for flexible working hours. But you have to be creative and think about it, and you got to ask. You're certainly never going to get it if you don't ask. The other thing is there are some major corporations who've done a lot of research on why women aren't moving up in their companies. And what they found is that when they have a job posting system, as most major corporations do, they went and looked at who was posting for jobs. And typically, a man will post for a job if there are 10 criteria posted. They'll apply for the job if they meet 4 of the criteria. For women, women have to check at least 9, sometimes 10 of the boxes before they'll apply. And I'm telling women that you've got to be willing to do what the guys are doing. Put yourself out there when you're not 100% qualified. Be willing to take those risks, because that's where growth happens. And so much of your upward mobility is about going into these jobs where you're not 100% qualified and learning the job and doing it. And then you're qualified to go to the next job up. College education only teaches you so much of what you need to know to be successful in these jobs. Most of it is about how well you can adapt, how well you learn, and how well you prepare yourself to move up to the next level. And it's not about being the technical expert. You do need to be able to grasp things, but you'll always have to depend on other people when you reach the senior levels to educate you on some of the more technical aspects of the job. Things change too fast for you to know everything, and nobody can know it all. And I tell people too that you need to be very self-aware. Know what you're good at and know what you're not good at. If you're not a person who's particularly sensitive to other people, then have somebody on your team or somebody who will be an accountability partner that will tell you when you need to be more sensitive to other people. If you're not good in finance, you do need to know some basics of finance. I used to tell the people I worked with in IT, the language of business is not bits and bytes. It is dollars and finance. And you've got to know how to manage the money and know what kind of value the products you deliver are driving to the bottom line and how to sell them to somebody inside the business. So you need some finance. If you don't have marketing skills, then you need to go get some marketing skills or have somebody on your team that has them. But also it's about building these trusting relationships and how you leverage yourself through other people. That's a real key to it. And I think so many times people think that their upward mobility, there's this real myth that the most technically competent person ends up being promoted, and that's just not true. Harvard actually did a study that said something like 15% of your upward mobility is tied to technical competence, and 85% of your upward mobility is tied to emotional intelligence and how sensitive you are to other people and to the culture around you. And I absolutely believe that, having spent 33 years in corporate America and working as an entrepreneur, a very successful entrepreneur in corporate America as well. The third message that I have in my book is that you're not going to be successful alone. You need a lot of relationships to help you be successful as you climb up the corporate ladder. In fact, the more people you know, the more access you have to information and to opportunities. And I used to spend a lot of time developing relationships with people who had the very same job I did, but at a different company, and talking to them on a regular basis. What's working at your company? What's not working? Because at the senior levels, there is no textbook that tells you how to do some of these things. The best learnings come from your peers. And so if you want to be successful at a senior level, you better be going somewhere and meeting a lot of your peers and having conversations with them about what does and doesn't work. Who are the vendors that you can partner with that deliver on their promises? Who are the people you should stay away from? And what are some best practices you have? And then being very sharing about that with other people. And figuring out what you can do to help other people. If you want to build relationships, the best way to do that is to figure out what you can do to help somebody else. I tell people that, yeah, there's givers and there's takers in this world, but the people that take and never give are not very successful for very long. And if your philosophy is always, when you have a conversation with anybody for the first time, meeting them, and when you're talking to them thinking, what could I do to help this person? You'll find something you can do to help them. And you know what? From there you build the relationship, and then those people will be there for you when you need them. You know, the single most important ingredient in any relationship is trust. And I always tell people, most people, when you go into a relationship with them, they don't distrust you. And so don't violate that. And I think most people will tell you, well, I'm a trustworthy person, I tell the truth, but then they won't do little things like they'll tell you they're coming to something RSVP, they're coming, and they don't show up. And there's always, or they'll tell you they're going to get a report done. They don't get it done on time. And there's always a reason why you can't do something. Get with people and let them know. Because if you don't deliver on the little things, it makes people think you're not going to be trustworthy on the big things. And your integrity is the single greatest asset you have on your brand. Don't ever compromise that, because if you ever violate that, it is virtually impossible to get it back. And I've been on teams with people that were brilliant, that didn't trust each other, didn't like each other, and you know, they could not accomplish anything, even the simplest of tasks. And then I've been on teams with people who liked each other, who had fun, and they trusted each other. And it is amazing the kind of work and value and accomplishment that a team like that can make happen. So your integrity is the one thing you have that you can't buy it back. It's too bad. I mean, it's not enough money. Once it's gone, it's gone. I don't care how rich you are. You've got it. If you have a tarnished reputation, you will never ever get it back to where it needed to be. And I tell people too that anytime you're talking about somebody else who has a bad reputation, your reputation gets a little bit tarnished too. So think about that when you're not maybe being supportive of somebody else, and try to always take the higher road with everyone, because you don't want your brand getting tarnished by maybe not being as supportive as you need to be of somebody else. You know, for me, what's been very important and in helping me be successful is my faith. And oddly enough, when I interviewed these 28 other women for my book, I asked them a question. I said, when things get really tough, you know, and you just don't know if you're going to make it or not, where do you draw your strength from? And a few people said, you know, their spouse. I think one person said their mother. Overwhelmingly, everybody said their faith. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And then I had a conversation with a woman named Laura Liswood, and Laura is a professor at Harvard and runs the Council of Living Women World Leaders. And she had done a documentary on the 19 women who were the head of their country. These are people not like Queen Elizabeth, who ascended the throne, but Margaret Thatcher, who was the prime minister. And she said that in interviewing those women, universally they had 4 things in common. One was that they were all excellent communicators. Not only could deliver a message very succinctly and very well and powerfully, but were great listeners. She said they had a diverse view of the world. They all understood how well their country fit in with world politics. She said they were very courageous, not willing to challenge the status quo, willing to take a stand on things that mattered to them. And then the 4th thing was that they were all very spiritually grounded, and that when things got tough, that's where they drew a lot of their strength from. And I think that that's been a very important part of my success, is having that and drawing on that. I generally start each day before I even get out of bed with some sort of prayer, and thinking about the things for which I'm most grateful. I think that if you start each day doing that, that it puts you in the right frame of mind for the rest of the day, because we have so much to be grateful for. I mean, there are 2 billion people who live in this world and don't even have enough to eat. So every day, everyone in this country should wake up energized about the opportunities and the resources that we have at our disposal, and thinking about the fact my glass is half full. How am I going to get it full? And so I think that has been extremely, extremely key. And I think it also helps you realize you're not alone. And having these 5 people, knowing at least that there's 5 people that when things get rough, you can pick up the phone and call them, because we all just need to vent. And sometimes by talking to somebody who's not as emotionally involved in something as you are, you yourself can begin to become a little more reasonable and see things that you might not have seen. And as a senior leader, thinking about controlling your actions. I'm a very passionate person. I get very excited about things. And I've been told that it's a double-edged sword, that you're really passionate. When you get excited about things, that's great, and you energize everybody around you. But boy, when you're upset about it, it shows too. And you can't do that as a senior leader, because people watch how you react, particularly in a crisis. And if you are upset, they get doubly upset. So it's very important, if you're a senior leader, regardless of what's going on, to be calm and stay focused on the facts too, because a lot of what happens is other people will come to you when they're upset, and really sometimes all they need to do is they just need to vent too. And if you keep yourself grounded in facts and seeking first to understand, facts tend to take the emotion out of things and allow you to be a lot more reasonable and see things from a good perspective. And you got to make decisions, and it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray there. So all you can do is the best you can do with the facts that you have. But what you don't want to do is go make a decision without having at least made the attempt to get the facts on the table, particularly when you're dealing with personnel issues. Because people used to ask me, what keeps you up at night? And I'd say, well, there's really nothing technically about this job. What would keep me up at night is a personnel issue. Anytime you got to deal with another human being's life, particularly if you're going through a downsizing of any kind in a company, there is nothing more difficult to deal with than that, nothing tougher. And those are the kinds of things that'll keep you up at night. I think HR is one of the most difficult places to work in any company. They don't always get the credit that they deserve, but I always valued what HR brought to the table, because I think, at the bottom line, if you're a senior executive in the company, HR is your, human resources is your number one job. Selecting the talent, grooming and growing them to the next level. I used to say, look at a person. If the people on their team getting promoted, moving to the next level and moving up, or is their organization a graveyard? They're not a very good leader if people on their team aren't getting promoted. And so to me, that's the greatest thing you do as a leader, is help identify that talent. If you are so important to your organization that when you walk away and you leave, it falls apart, you're a terrible leader. You should always have 3 or 4 people in mind that can come in right behind you, and it just should not skip a beat. You've not done your company a very good service if you haven't focused on that. I love a quote by Deepak Chopra. He always says that the universe has a perfect accounting system. You get out of life exactly what you put into it. And I've seen so many times where you make one little investment in somebody, and it delivers back dividends of huge multitudes. And so I never hesitate, if I can help somebody, regardless of how small or insignificant it might seem. I try to do what I can to help, and time again, I have been rewarded for that. The other thing is that I think mentors come from all around you, not just people above you in an organization. I used to spend a lot of time doing something I called reverse mentoring, where I would find somebody in my organization who was really good at doing something. It may be somebody who was really good at doing something technically, and I would have them come and reverse coach me every couple of months. And that did a couple things. Number one, it built a relationship with somebody at a grassroots level in my organization, and they would talk to other people about how hard I was trying to learn what was going on in the organization. And at the same time, then I learned these new skills that I just frankly didn't have the time to go sign up and go take a course somewhere. And I don't think people always understand that that mentors don't necessarily have to be somebody higher up than you. And because there were no other women really who were higher than me in the organization, I learned a lot from women that were younger. I'd see a young woman on my team who gave a really great presentation, and I'd go to her and say, help me understand how you did that. And so mentors are absolutely critical to our success. But the other thing that's absolutely critical are sponsors. And there's a big difference between the two, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. And I don't think, till I got to the senior level of the company. And I certainly, didn't have any female sponsors. I did have some sponsors outside the company. Betty Siegel from Kennesaw College was actually what I would call my first female sponsor. I went through a program called Leadership Georgia in 1994, and Betty was the leadership speaker. It was the first time I'd really seen a very strong just incredible woman speak about leadership, and she was so successful at the time. And I wrote her like a 3-page letter after I heard her talk, and then she reached out to me, and we got together for lunch, and she's become a lifelong friend and mentor to me. In fact, there are things I wrote about in my book that I learned about from Betty, and one of the most important was balance, because she was also a working mother with 2 children. And I was struggling at the time because my daughter was very, very young, and she helped me understand that the most important thing you need to do is take care of your family. That, you know, work will be there, and if you surround yourself with the right kind of teammates, they'll be there to pull for you. But you don't get to go back and do some of those things a second time. And as I look back now, I'm so glad that I had those wise words of wisdom from her. But inside my company, and this is the way it happens in all large corporations, when you're making a decision about a senior level, a VP job in a company, it's not made by one person. It's typically made by a selection committee. And you've got to have somebody advocating for you before your name even gets on those lists. And even if your name is on the list and you have one person advocating for you, it becomes a very political process, because if there's somebody else sitting around that table that's not a fan of yours, you're not going to get the job. Or if there are 3 people advocating for somebody and you just have one person advocating for you, you're not going to get it unless that sponsor is really, really strong. So politics and having a sponsor is absolutely essential to getting the next job. And if you don't have a sponsor, you're going to have a problem getting there. And you don't typically go and choose a sponsor, they find you. But if you do good work, then you typically will be somebody who surfaces as someone who's worthy of having a sponsor. I always tell people too that when you have your annual performance review, that's a good time to sit down and talk to your boss. And hopefully your boss is somebody who one day will be a sponsor. Maybe they're not now. That's another reason to be very selective about who you choose to go to work for. Is this a rising star that maybe you can, hook your wagon to? Or is this somebody who's just going to stay where they are? So always do your best work so that people will want to take you with them. But also ask your boss, if there's a job that you want, ask your boss to call the person that runs that department and tell them that he or she would like for them to do a 15-minute get-to-know with you. Most people will do a 15-minute get-to-know, particularly if your boss calls and says, this is a really sharp person, I would appreciate if you'd spend some time with them. Now, if you get that 15-minute meeting, be very focused when you go into that meeting. Make sure that you are being productive with that person's time about what it takes to go to work in their department, what advice they would have for you. And then follow up with them. Let them know what you did to follow up on that advice. People often had these kinds of meetings with me, but when they didn't follow up, or if they called back and wanted a second meeting, said they'd not had time to follow up on the advice I gave them, they never got a second meeting with me. So make sure that if you get that 15-minute meeting, you follow up and let that person know that they've made a good investment in you. And once they've made one investment in you, they'll make another. And you don't have to meet with them face-to-face. Just send them an email and say, you advised me to go and shadow somebody for a day, for example. That's the best feedback I've ever gotten. Let them know. And then that way they'll be a lot more generous with you and maybe even give you a 30-minute meeting instead of a 15-minute meeting. But you have to ask. You have to make that happen. Too many times I think people sit back and they wait for their bosses to tell them what to do. And they think their boss is going to look out for them and help them get that next job. And you can't wait for your boss to do that. It's your job to do that for you. And do it in a way that you're sensitive so that your existing boss doesn't think you're just trying to get out of their department, but is excited and interested in helping you grow to that next career level. And make sure that you're not so focused on the next job that you're not getting your work done where you are, because you have to do that too. But companies are starving for leadership. I'll never forget too, as I was going up the corporate ladder one day, somebody said to me, they said, why do you do all this stuff outside of our job? Like you're involved in all these organizations in the company and you're doing all this stuff in the community on a per hour basis. I'm making twice as much money as you are. And I said, well, you know what? I said, I do that because I'm continuing to grow and learn, and I meet a lot of people that help me be successful in this job by doing that. And that person has never moved beyond the department that we worked in together. And I had the opportunity to move on up the ladder, and I think it's because I made all these investments beyond the job description. Job description is what you get paid to do. You really want to be a leader and want to move on up, you need to figure out how you add value beyond that and how you build that network with those people who will help you be successful once you get to those senior levels. I feel very fortunate in that I grew up in corporate America in the time that I did. I think had I come into the corporate world any earlier, I might not have had the same opportunities. I don't think that it was very easy for women prior to 1970. In fact, when I came into the company in 1978, I thought maybe one of these days I'll get to supervise some people. I never dreamed I would end up being a senior executive in the company. And so it's been hard because I do feel like in a lot of jobs I went into, people said, she can't do that job. And for some people, I think that shuts them down. I'm the kind of person who really likes a challenge, and for me, I was like determined that I was going to show people that I could do that. I think our younger women today won't have some of those same challenges. Although I do know from my work this past year, traveling across corporate America and talking to women inside corporations, that things are still not where they need to be. And that's why we're continuing to see women drop out and not pursue jobs at the senior level. Of course, I see men do that too. Being in the C-suite is not for everybody. It's very hard work. And I tell people, if you want to be in the C-suite, you're probably not going to be at every ball game your child has. It's all about trade-offs. And I feel too that my husband has been a key part of helping me be successful. I married my college sweetheart. We met when we were sophomores in college. And he's been my biggest cheerleader and supporter, and I never could have done everything I've done in corporate America had he not been supportive of me. He has turned down some significant opportunities so that we could stay in the same city and I could be successful in my job. I spend a lot of time talking to women who are working and raising their children because I suffered a lot with guilty working mother syndrome. And I see a lot of young women who do that today. And I tell women, you know, it's very doable. There are more working women today than there ever have been, and there certainly will be in the future because 60% of the people in college today are women. And companies are figuring out they've got to create a more inclusive culture for women or they're not going to be able to retain the best talent. And today we are competing in a very global marketplace against China and India, who have more smart people than we do people in this country. So we've got to take these highly educated and talented women and help them understand that they can be successful in corporate America. And that means creating an environment where they can also balance their families better. And by the way, you know, this is a male issue too. I managed and led more men who were trying to balance issues at home as well, because they mostly have working wives now as well. But I think there's 3 keys to having more balance in your life. The first sort of goes back to the first part of my book, and that is dare to begin within. Know what it is that you want, because we all define success very differently. And if you know what it is that you want, then you begin to prioritize around that. It allows you to say no to things that don't take you down the path that you want to go down. The second thing is outsource. You know, when my child was little, there were very few options for childcare. And we always had to have somebody that we paid to come to our house and paid a fortune for it. Now I look around, there are these fabulous childcare facilities that teach, 2 and 3 languages. And so we didn't have those options, but you can outsource childcare. You can also outsource cooking. My husband's idea of a home-cooked meal walks in the house in a paper bag. So, and cleaning your house. We either had a dirty house or somebody else was cleaning it. So don't think that you have to do everything. You can outsource. And as a part of outsourcing too is really leveraging the technology. I never will forget, one day I walked into a hair salon and there was one of our other female vice presidents. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a Thursday. We had both snuck out early to get our hair done. In the old days, you would have had to go on a Saturday to do something like that. And we were sitting there with all this stuff in our hair, this foil in our hair. She's talking on her cell phone, and I'm talking on my cell phone and working on my iPad. And I thought, those people back in the office, they have no clue where we are. But we're being just as productive as we would if we were sitting behind our desk. But you just have to be very smart about leveraging the technology and really embracing it. And then the last thing, and this is the thing I see women struggle with the most, and some men struggle too, but primarily I see women struggle with this, and that's delegate. You know, if you're going to be in a senior level job, you better learn how to figure out what things you can delegate to somebody else and really leverage yourself through other people. And so much of that is about surrounding yourself with the right team and getting people off the team if they are not people you can depend on and delegate to. Because nothing can be more miserable than having people that aren't the right people on your team. I interviewed 28 very senior women for my book, and I asked them a couple of questions. One of the questions I asked them is, I said, if you had a young person you cared deeply about coming into the workforce today, and if you could give them one piece of advice for success, what would it be? The overwhelming answer was, be willing to take more risk. Get out of your comfort zone. A comfort zone is a dangerous place to be, and do it on a regular basis, because it's those experiences that really grow you and grow your leadership so that you're ready for the next move. And then I asked them, I said, if you could go back in time and change one really big mistake that you made, what would it be? And the number one answer was that they should have fired somebody quicker than they did. And I think as women in particular, we want to give somebody every single chance in the world to be successful and won't do the tough things to fire somebody. And many of them told me stories of where their career almost got derailed because they did not deal with those issues. So I tell women, if you have somebody who's not supporting you, who's not a team player, that you can't trust, get them off your team. Because that's disruptive not just for you, but for everybody else on the team as well. But this whole thing about taking risk is so critical. I like to share the story of Babe Ruth. You know, Babe Ruth hit 713 career home runs, more than anybody else in the league at his time in history. His record has, of course, since been broken. But if you go back and you check the records, he led the league in strikeouts most of those years too. Nobody talks about the strikeouts. But what's important about that is he was willing to get up to the plate. And he was willing to try, and he would swing. And if he missed, you know what he did? He learned what didn't work, so he could be successful in the next try. And careers are like that too. You've got to be willing to get up that plate and swing and try. And the reason I think that sometimes this is harder for women than it is for men is we don't have the same social safety networks that men do. I'm seeing that change in corporate America. Men typically are part of a network of other men who support them and take care of them, and women haven't always had that. But now there are enough women breaking through the glass ceiling, getting to those senior levels, that we can begin to provide those safety nets for each other. And so I tell women at the senior levels, I know it's tough because there's still not enough of you there, but you got to be there for that next generation coming along. You got to be that safety net for them. And I tell younger women too, it's hard to be in these jobs because still there's a lot of scrutiny of the senior women that are there, and you need to be supportive. And if you see a senior woman who's doing something you don't like, try to find a way to get that feedback to her so she can correct it. And make sure that you've got all of your facts. And if you hear somebody being more selectively critical of her, then challenge them and push them back and say, help me understand why you feel that way. I said, because they need your support. And if they're doing something good, write them a handwritten note. You know, my greatest praise didn't come from letters from my CEO. I would get a little handwritten note from somebody on the front line. I would be having the worst day in the world, and I'd get this note from somebody saying I did something right. And I would keep those notes in my drawer. And on those days when it got really rough, I'd pull those notes out and I would read them and say, I'm not doing so bad. Because we all need affirmation. And I tell people too that you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. What kind of attitudes do they have? Are you hanging around people that are a bunch of whiners? Because you know what, if you do that, you're going to end up being a whiner too. But think about that network. If you want to be a good tennis player, what do? Go play tennis with somebody who's better than you. Careers are the same way. Surround yourself with a bunch of winners, a bunch of people with positive, can-do attitudes. And you know what? You'll become that same way. But it's up to you to manage that network and make sure that those 5 people you're hanging out with are people you can count on to tell you when you screw up. I interviewed a lot of men for my book, and I asked them myself, if you could change one thing about women and business, what would it be? And overwhelmingly, the response from them, and this was kind of shocking to me, was quit taking it so personal. And I kind of wanted to say to them, well, you might want to think about the feedback you give and wrapping it somehow a little nicer when you give it to a woman. But at the same time, I think that nobody wants to be the emperor with no clothes on, and that only people that care the most about you will take the time to coach you and counsel you and tell you the things you really need to fix. And that you need to be very aggressive in going out and asking for feedback and being open, regardless of how much it hurts. And not be defensive, because that's how you get better, is through that self-awareness and getting that feedback. But if you don't go ask for it, and if you're not open to it when you do get it, then there's a lot of things that you need to fix that you're never gonna hear about. And I tell people too, think about what your 2 greatest developmental needs are. When I ask people, what are your 2 biggest strengths, they can tell you like that. When I ask them, what are your developmental needs, I'm amazed how few times people can tell me that and how unself-aware they are. I always tell people too that you have a brand. Just like Coca-Cola has a brand, Home Depot has a brand, you have one. It's what people say about you when you are not in the room. So think about it. What are the 2 to 3 adjectives that people would use to describe you? If you don't know what that is, you probably need to find out. And is that the adjectives that you want them to use to describe you? If not, then you need to start thinking about what you can do to brand yourself and communicate those messages that will help you create that brand. I asked an awful lot of people from my book about the one piece of advice that they would give to a young person they cared about that they wanted to be successful. I'd have the same advice, And it goes back to what's in my book. Think about what it is that you want, and think far bigger than you think you can. Because as human beings, you have about 65,000 thoughts in an average day. And about 85% of those thoughts are negative, where you're talking yourself out of doing something. That's how our species has survived. But so many of the things that these warnings that we're constantly giving ourselves, talking ourselves out of doing things, are not things that you need to worry about. Some of them are. You want to remember, if you put your hand over a candle flame, not to do that. You'll get burned. But putting yourself out there and being concerned about how other people are going to judge you, that's not something that's going to kill you. You just don't know if you don't do it. We learn so much by experience. I talked about public speaking and leadership being learned, and confidence is too. Confidence is all experiential. Putting yourself out there, learning what doesn't work so that you can make adjustments and be successful on the next try. But you just got to be willing to push beyond those 65,000 thoughts every day that are telling you that you can't, and be very focused on what it is that you want. There's a remarkable book out there, other than my book Dare, but it is a pretty remarkable book in that it was written in the 1920s. It was written by Napoleon Hill, and the book is Think and Grow Rich. And Napoleon Hill was hired by Andrew Carnegie to interview 500 of the most successful people of that time, in the 1920s, and it took him 25 years to conduct all the research and interview these people. And he came back and he had one single piece of advice. He said these people all had a clear vision of what it is that they wanted, and they expected it to happen. And so you really got to begin within. You've got to think bigger than you think you can, and you've got to go for it boldly. And don't let anybody tell you that you can't. I always tell people, I dare you. That's why the title of my book is Dare.